Magic mushrooms. The term itself suggests transformative properties and miraculous outcomes. And indeed, psilocybin, the psychedelic compound in mushrooms, has shown promise as a treatment for a wide range of maladies and a shortcut to spiritual enlightenment and personal growth. But as interest in these fascinating fungi grows, it is increasingly difficult to judge how much is hyperbole, or worse, mere hype. Despite the headlines, medical research into psilocybin is in its early stages, but citizen scientists have long investigated magic mushrooms' ability to heal, enlighten, and inspire. Mushroom expert Eugenia Bone immersed herself in psychedelic culture to help the mushroom curious discern fact from hopeful fiction, to demystify trends like microdosing, and to better understand the risks as well as the rewards. Bone shares her own experiences hunting, cultivating, and using mushrooms in a variety of settings, and goes deeply into the self-selecting communities whose investigations of the physical, emotional, and spiritual beliefs of psilocybin lead the science today. Along the way, she introduces the colorful cast of characters at the forefront of psychedelic exploration and shines a light into the murky corners of culture both above and underground, in which mushroom misinformation proliferates. Illuminating, comprehensive, and above all entertaining, Have a Good Trip is a highly readable exploration of the potential and pitfalls of magic mushrooms. This book is by my friend Eugenia Bone, and she wrote the foreword to my book. So as a favor to that, I want to talk about her book, as it's phenomenal. And I can't normally talk about magic mushrooms myself, but I think that if I'm reading a book by another author, maybe I have a little bit more leeway to literally just read what she has written. And that way we can talk about it, but I hopefully won't get in trouble for talking to you about this subject because I'm just reading from a book. Eugenia wrote my favorite mushroom book that I read when I was getting into mushroom hunting, called Mycophilia, which is all about her journey getting into mushroom hunting and becoming like the president of the New York Mycological Society. And Eugenia's book had a big impact on me and made me approach mushrooms in a very different way. And then I got much more involved with communities, going out to events, doing outreach, leading by example in terms of how I wanted to experience the mushroom world and culture by educating people and trying to dispel misinformation and kind of hyperbole and hype. And it sounds like that's a lot of what she's doing in this book in the context of magic mushrooms, because believe me, there's a lot of bullshit out there. And I would love to talk to you guys about it more and educate more about it, but I'm not allowed to because of the constraints of social media, particularly here on TikTok and on Instagram. Any video I've ever tried to make talking about magic mushrooms immediately gets me reported, or like my account gets threatened to be banned, this kind of stuff. So I don't talk about it. But I did write about it in my book. So if you want to know my thoughts on it, you can buy my book when it comes out. But Eugenia's book is out now, so you can give this a read until mine comes out. So, also, this is an entire book about magic mushrooms. My book is everything in the fungal kingdom. So it's not just about psychedelics. This book is mostly just about psychedelics. So, and basically what she says at the beginning, it's a disclaimer. It says, this book is for informational, educational purposes only and should not be construed as advocacy for the use of any illegal substance. And I think it's really important to say that kind of thing. I said a similar disclaimer in my book. The possession, sale, and or use of psilocybin is illegal under United States federal law and the laws of many other countries. There is an updated list of the legality of psilocybin on Wikipedia, and I link to that article in my book. While the decriminalization of psilocybin is underway in a number of states and local jurisdictions, the readers should consult legal counsel with regard to these matters. I don't think you need to consult counsel, but you could at least look up what the status is in your local area. I know in the Bay Area, there has been a decriminalization, at least in San Francisco, Berkeley, Oakland, of a lot of psychedelics, but it doesn't mean they're not illegal. It just means the cops aren't necessarily cracking down on it, but if someone wanted to come at a federal level, they could do that and still put you in jail. So again, be really careful with what you say and put on the internet. And it's important to view all this stuff through a critical lens. And I think Eugenia does a great job with that. So that's part of why I'm reading this to you guys. I have a lot of respect for her as an author. And she's being a big inspiration to me. So, moreover, the information in this book is not intended to replace the advice of the reader's own physician or other medical professional. She basically says just, talk to a doctor and you are responsible for your own decisions, is basically what she says. So with that, we're going to read the book. So here's her prologue. Last summer, I was in my rural Colorado community's grocery store when a lady I know stopped me mid-aisle. She told me about her granddaughter, a high-achieving college student who was barely hanging on, her education upended by anxiety and depression. She wanted to know how to get her granddaughter the psychedelic drug psilocybin because she had heard a one-time dosage would resolve the girl's troubles. But she wasn't clear on the distinction between clinical trials and retreats, psilocybin versus magic mushrooms, and the efficacy of microdoses in relation to heavy trips. As the ice cream in my cart melted, Ben & Jerry's Cherry Garcia, the psychedelic flavor, and that's really the only flavor of Ben & Jerry's I will go out of my way to eat. It's a good one. I explained that I'd learned over the years how to find a clinical trial, how to judge a retreat, the differences between doses. I also told her psilocybin, the active ingredient in magic mushrooms, wasn't a panacea, and she means a cure-all. And she and her granddaughter might want to manage their expectations before jumping in. My neighbor thought for a minute, and then, in her unembellished Western way, said, "Well, that all makes good sense." Which is usually what I find. Even today, after I gave my talk, I had several people come up and ask me about magic mushrooms. And, all you can really say is like, well, here's the information, temper your expectations. It's not a cure-all. You may have heard a lot of things, but still a drug like any other, there are risks. And it, may or may not work for what you want. But you can try it as long as you do it with intention and purpose, and ideally in a legal or at least decriminalized setting kind of thing, so you're not breaking any laws. This is what happens when the word gets out you are researching psychedelic drugs. I constantly meet folks who want to help deciphering the hype. They seek plain insights that aren't tainted by advocacy or commercial interests or the pursuit of clicks. Information that simply makes good sense. Never mind that just a few years ago in a small town like ours, trippers were seen as degenerates, which is still very true. Anyone interested in magic mushrooms throughout history has been considered like a hippie and a dirty person. And now all of these rich old people are like, so what's this microdosing thing I hear about? And you're like, you're the one who for years has been enforcing drug policy that made this shit illegal, and now you're interested in doing it. Hypocrisy, folks. When I first got interested in mycology about 20 years ago and began attending mycological conferences and lectures, it was rare to hear anything about magic mushrooms and the psychoactive molecule psilocybin they contain. They were the black sheep of the mycology world. That's not surprising. When the Controlled Substances Act was passed in 1971, psilocybin, and by extension, species in the psilocybe genus of mushrooms that it contains, was classified as a Schedule I drug, one with no accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse, which is absolutely not true of mushrooms and psilocybin. But it got scheduled as Schedule I. That's the kind of thing that, I don't know. I mean, I think I want to say that marijuana is also Schedule I. So, the really dangerous drugs like coke, heroin, fentanyl, those aren't even Schedule I because they technically have medical uses. But psilocybin and marijuana don't have prescribed medical uses at a federal level, even though most states have legalized marijuana at this point. And a lot of states are now getting into decriminalizing psilocybin or other psychedelics because they clearly have a medical use, but they're still scheduled as having no medical use and high potential for abuse, which I think is kind of crazy. Up until recently, it probably would have tanked a scientist's career to work on psilocybe. This is the genus that has psilocybin in it. in any capacity, because besides a taxonomic project, that's other than just trying to understand where it sits evolutionarily, people who were into these mushrooms were generally seen as druggies, or druggies pretending to be something else, like ethnomycologists, doctors, or spiritual leaders, which are all legitimate things in their own right. For decades, the only venue where magic mushrooms were discussed with any academic seriousness was the Telluride Mushroom Festival. For much of its history, the festival, which began in 1981, was small and funky. And I've been there now twice, 2 years in a row. It's still funky. It's a little bigger than it used to be, but it is funky. It is a good time. And there's some serious scientific gravitas that goes on there, more so than I necessarily thought, which was good to see. And Eugenia is a big part of that community. So she's one of the people who brought me in, convinced me that it was a place that I belonged as well. That's because there were so few people working on psychedelics in a serious way, but also because many saw the festival as an opportunity to trip. I remember a panel discussion where one of the panelists kept bursting into apropos of nothing, giggling, and another teetering on his stool, pretending his mic was off, and just mouthed his responses. The talk was, unsurprisingly, more hilarious than informative. But all that has changed. In 2023, the festival sold out. Notable scientists shared papers on their current research. Andrew Weil, one of the festival's grand poobahs, who hadn't attended in years, offered a keynote address on how the psychedelic scene had evolved from fringe to mainstream. Speakers get swag bags now, loaded with mushroom products and psychedelic stickers. I did not get a swag bag, but I did see Andrew Weil, reflecting the boom of new mushroom-oriented businesses. And the audience, once scant and mostly inebriated, is full of eager listeners busily taking notes. Eugenia knows her festival well. She's been there for a long time. It's just funny to hear her talking about it that way. That psychedelics have gone mainstream was made more clear to me at the 2023 Psychedelic Science Conference in Denver. I heard about this. Widely and enthusiastically touted as the largest psychedelic gathering in history, it was more like the world's biggest pep rally for altered states, which is also what I heard about this event. The Psychedelic Science Conference was sponsored by the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, called MAPS. And I've heard of MAPS from lots of different friends. A nonprofit founded in 1986 by the drug activist Rick Doblin that has become a leader in psychedelic research and education. If, as anticipated, MDMA becomes available to treat veterans of PTSD over the next few years, we will have a MAPS to thank. Unfortunately, MDMA did not get approved. It was a massive surprise to a lot of people in the industry that thought that MDMA therapy was going to be approved, and it wasn't. And so there's a lot of people setting up businesses to do MDMA therapy on the expectation that it was going to be made legal, and at a federal level, they just cut that shit off. And I believe MDMA is still scheduled lower than like mushrooms and marijuana, which also doesn't make sense because it's more dangerous than both of those drugs. But it definitely does have psychedelic or like therapeutic purposes, and it probably should be used for therapy. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm reading Eugenia's book. So unfortunately, she wrote this before that decision was made public, so she's postulating that it would be legal, but it's not. Whoops. Over the course of 5 days, 13,000 people wandered the chilly concourses of the Colorado Convention Center searching for the talk on amplifying the wisdom of psychedelic elders, room 201, efficacy of psilocybin and OCD, Four Seasons Ballroom, and Buddhism and psychedelics, room 605. There were book signings, film screenings, performances, all of them seemingly happening at the same time. I walked so many steps, scuttling from presentation to presentation, my fitness app sent me a congratulatory message. So, sounds like she was on the move. An exhibit hall housed a maze of some 275 exhibitors, hawking everything from flotation devices to psychedelic mushroom spore syringes for cultivation. All kinds of advocacy groups peddled their mandates, like Silly Girls, harm reduction tools, and artisan foundational mushroom creations, Moms on Mushrooms, a support group for stressed mothers, and Poo God, an exotic mushroom supplies. And I saw Poo God at Telluride. They have huge blocks of substrate with lots of very large psilocybe fruiting bodies on them. It was quite impressive. When it was time to leave the hall, I was so discombobulated I had to be let out by a volunteer. A cavernous corner was dedicated to vivid art, much of it in day-glow colors, virtual experiences, and a raucous auction headed up by multimedia artist Android Jones, a master of the psychedelic genre, who looked like the kind of guy you would befriend in high school detention, only with a shaven head and a ponytail of skinny strawberry blonde locks, like a bouquet of a limp number 2 pencil. Okay, that's like a very specific description. Judging from the conference attendees, the demographics of the psychedelic scene are way larger and more diverse than the crowd I came to know all those 10 years ago at the Telluride Mushroom Festival. Today it includes bros who check the NASDAQ on their phones while gobbling MDMA, umpteen PhDs in something psychedelic, earnest fans who throng the scientists, BIPOC organizers and indigenous people who argue for equity and a right relationship regarding the use and distribution of psychedelic substances, and a large and curious public, many in sequins. Even Rick Perry, the conservative former governor of Texas, was there, although not in sequins, in support of psychedelic treatment for veterans suffering from PTSD. That's interesting. Rick Perry was like a total a-hole in Texas, and then he got absolutely clowned by Trump for like wearing glasses, which is so funny. Is like the man needs to see, and he actually looked more intelligent with glasses, but Trump somehow made him seem dumber for having worn glasses, which again is pure conjecture, because everything Trump says is basically a projection about his own insecurities. So you can understand that everything he says is really just he's insecure about it, so he insults others. He's an a-hole. But I digress. At the conference, I noticed that many of the speakers started off by explaining their context, sharing relevant personal background and socially important details like their preferred pronouns. I think this trend reflects the expectations of the greater psychedelic community, where individual experience is valued as much as academic credentials. And indeed, the significance of lived experience when it comes to psychedelic drugs cannot be overstated. Lived experiences can be shared over a millennium among indigenous peoples, specifically those residing in Mexico and other Central American countries, and their knowledge about magic mushrooms remains the greatest reservoir of experience, followed by the collective experiences of the rest of us. Only a small percentage of what is known about these drugs has been generated by science. In fact, despite the headlines trumpeting breakthroughs, most psilocybin research isn't much further along than showing promise. It's very much in its infancy, and even some of the studies have contradicted themselves, so that's part of what she's getting at. To understand how magic mushrooms are used today, it is essential to recognize the anecdotal experiences of magic mushroom users, the folks who consume psilocybe species that contain psilocybin and other psychoactive molecules. Their collective know-how represents an important body of knowledge from which we all can benefit, and not just regarding psilocybe species. There are other species of mushrooms that are psychoactive, like Amanita muscaria, but while those users are less numerous, interest in Amanita muscaria, or AMA as she calls it, is growing, in part because it is a legal mushroom to consume. And it's legal everywhere except for Louisiana. Louisiana has like very weird laws around mushrooms. But Amanita muscaria is legal. I last year was selling a tincture made with it. It was made in pharmaceutical context, so I felt comfortable selling that, or like, helping to promote it kind of thing, because it had been made to this like pharmaceutical standard. There's a lot of Amanita products out there that are not made to that pharmaceutical standard, and I do not recommend taking those because they have very variable dosage. And there was a big thing this summer. A bunch of people got sick from Amanita muscaria gummies because the dosage was wonky and people got all sorts of bad symptoms. So if you're going to try something, get it from like a known, reputable source. The company I was getting it from was called Psyched Wellness. I think my discount code with them is no longer active, but I will probably talk to them again at some point once I get my shit together. Okay, so it is also risky. She's talking about Amanita muscaria. It's a riskier mushroom in many ways, requiring pre-treatments to modify the active ingredients ibotenic and muscimol. That is an interesting story, but it belongs in another book. So I guess she's not going to talk about it, but I've talked about converting ibotenic acid into muscimol a lot through chemistry. You don't have to drink reindeer pee don't do that. You can just boil it in an acidic solution at a high temp for a little while, or dry it out and then make a tea out of it. That's usually how people consume Amanita muscaria. And again, it's legal. You can buy it on the internet. I have it all over my Christmas tree right there. Or my Amanita tree, whatever it is. Cheers. Those who choose to use magic mushrooms do so for work enhancement, to treat mood and abuse disorders, to deal with trauma and stress, to enhance their spiritual lives, and to just have fun, either solo or in the community. Many self-organize based on identity, like BIPOC groups, or in search of cures, like cluster headache sufferers. They find one another by word of mouth or through the internet. Some trip together, but many participate in a kind of after-the-trip group therapy, where they share their experience and try to make sense out of it with the help of other like-minded people. These citizen psychopharmacists are essentially doing research on themselves, as indigenous people have for a very long time. And it is their reported experience that often leads the science. Research in microdosing mushrooms, for example, is happening because so many people have said it helped. Have a Good Trip is a book informed by trippers and their trip reports. The practice of writing up the details of your trip and sharing them. It's a trip report. Part 1 provides basic information about psilocybin-containing psilocybe mushrooms and how they interact with your body, as well as what a bad trip is and how it can be mitigated. Part 2 details the different ways people acquire mushrooms. Finally, in Part 3, I break down the 3 main trip types: microdosing, therapeutic, and spiritual. And then I look at the variety of psychedelic communities that are organized for support, pleasure, and sometimes both. The support of this book is to offer a basic understanding of what these mushrooms might and might not do. The book is also a travelogue of sorts in my attempt to understand how different people use these fungi. I use them too, and in the process, I found a lot about myself and how I interact with others. Not all of it was easy, but I can honestly say I'm better off for it. Obviously, I can't give advice, but I can present what I've learned agenda-free, just like I did with my friend in Colorado in that grocery store last summer. So I think Eugenia is a uniquely situated person to write about this topic, because she has a long experience around psychedelics and people who talk about psychedelics, people who do psychedelics, people who evangelize psychedelics. But she went and explored a lot of different communities here and got a sense of, how people are using them, what they're using them for. She's going to, cover the basics and the science of them in a very, just well-written way. She's a good researcher. And so I'm excited to read this book. I think when I'm done reading this book, I will do a live chat with her on Instagram, and hopefully that'll be really interesting. I'll probably upload that to YouTube as well. So hopefully you guys enjoyed hearing a little preview of Have a Good Trip by Eugenia Bone.